Welcome back to the second half of the OHMazing Way podcast. My name is Beth Reese. I'm the founder of Yoginios Yoga for Youth and the host of the OHMazing Way. And I'm here today with Rick Yoder, a special education teacher who specializes in working with youth who experience emotional challenges. And in the first half, we talked a bit about the difference between the diagnosis of emotional disturbance, and we were saying that trying not to label people and instead veer towards an emotional obstacle or challenge, the difference between that and just having big emotions, right? And here in the second half, I'm about to hand the baton over to Rick, who's going to share one of his quick go-to tools that he uses in his classroom. And then we're going to hear more about his choice to add in yoga and kids yoga into his classroom. So Rick, would you share with us the tool that you like to use?
One of the tools that I really like to use is what we call in Yoginios the Shanti hug. And part of that is, to me, as an occupational therapist, one of the things that I learned, or that you learn as your primary foundation, is that you adapt your focus, you adapt how you do something, you adapt to overcome an obstacle, to overcome a challenge. So when you think about it, sometimes you see people with their, when they're practicing yoga and they're able to wrap their hands around and have them out in front and overlap and underlap. And as you mentioned earlier, like a pretzel. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a big guy. So my shoulders, my arms, my forearms don't quite do that. But one of the things that a person told me is you can get the same feeling. You're looking, what your body is doing in that is a compression, and it's that wrapping and everything is creating almost what we refer to in OT, especially in working with students who are on the spectrum, as neutral warmth and as compression. And so one of the things that I like to use in just helping myself to decompress and to helping students to decompress and things like that is in Yoginios is called the Shanti hug. So you take a big deep breath and you put your arms out to the sides. Take a big deep breath and bring your right arm under your left arm and bring your left arm over your right arm, and then take another big deep breath.
So we're doing like a big self-bear hug for those of you.
Big self-bear hug. And so you're getting those elbows crossed in the front, much like you're getting the elbows crossed in that twisted pretzel hand pose we were talking about. And then you repeat it for the other side. So you bring your arms back out again, take another deep breath, and then cross them over the opposite way and give yourself another big, deep hug. And we find that that's a good way to start the day. It's a good way to end the day. If we have a student who is severely ramping up with their emotional challenges and they start to literally come apart and explode, the thing that we'll do with them after we get them to calm back down and come back into the classroom is when we have to remove the traumatizing stimulus as to what caused. We have to figure out what the traumatizing stimulus was. A lot of times we know ahead of time based on what happened, but then to be able to bring everything back in. So like when we were talking earlier about, if a student makes fun of another student, then we'll make sure that the student who got ramped up is calm, enters, and that the student then who was the cause of the emotional outburst, that they then work together to apologize to each other effectively. So one of the things we really did is a 3-step apology. So it's not this sorry, and you go from there. You take accountability for your actions, and I think that's one of the things that I find in yoga, both as an adult and with my kids, is that it helps us work on our accountability. I had some experience with with yoga over the years, and I never felt a connection with my instructor like I find that I have with my adult instructor here in San Antonio, and with you as my children's yoga instructor. There it was more like, okay, here are the moves, and if you can't, then just try and get there, and things like that. And like, there was no moving around. One of the things like that my teachers do now is you move around, you check on us. As a teacher, as a future yoga teacher, one of the things that I know that we'll focus on, especially doing it with the kids, is that you show and then you check, and you show and you check, because their bodies are adapting, bendy, and what we call, they can do things that you can't do quite as an adult, but there are still postures that if you don't do them correctly, you can hurt yourself even as a child. And that's one of the things that happened to me as an adult. In one yoga class I went to, the instructor was going so fast, there was very little connection with her class, and she wanted everyone to bring their left leg up straight in the air from a downward facing dog. And I'm like, the first thing, my pelvis popped, and I was like, whoa, and stood up and popped everything back into place, and I turned around and I walked out, and I was like, this is not, I don't feel the connection here. You're forcing us to do stuff.
And yoga literally means to yoke, to connect, to unite.
To connect,
and
right.
What part of what you're pointing to in, there's yoga in the West that often is embraced as purely exercise, and often the poses are led in a more rapid way, and it's pose, 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 pose. And that's fine. That's one form of yoga. And sometimes what I personally find is that yoga disassociates the yoga, the connection to yourself, others, and the universe. Yeah. And so then you find the yoga practitioners who also understand that one of the benefits because yoga can be very much about physical fitness as well as mental hygiene, emotional health, and that one of the differences between like maybe a step class or another form of exercise is that in yoga you're really developing and expanding your connection and understanding of yourself. And so I know you've done that in ways in your classroom with your students. What are some of those, like, take us really on the court so our listeners can have some practical examples they can use in their classroom and home? What are a couple of things you've integrated this year that have really made a difference?
One of the things that I really integrated in the time that I started my children's training, of course, was flower power breath, and trying to get because it's one of those things that, if I see that a student is ramping up and things like that, if we can get them to slow down, and we don't just say breathe. Sometimes they've said, oh, you just need to breathe. Or the worst thing you can say to a student or a child who has an emotional disturbance is, you need to calm down. Because that's just going to cycle up that energy even further.
That's also the worst thing you can say to me when I'm upset, by the way, is just calm down.
Just calm down. Exactly.
No one hear that. Don't tell me that.
Yeah, we think about it. When you talk about, like we were talking about earlier, everyone has their own pool of emotions when you think about it. And what upsets us can be a variety of things. One of the things that I know yoga has really helped me with is just even staying calm in real stressful situations, like, say, a bad traffic jam and things like that. When you're trying to get to yoga class and there's 50 cars at the stoplight, and the stoplights are timed really fast for some reason that day, and you're just like, okay, just take a few flower power breaths and breathe it back out, and remember why you're here, and remember what you're doing and how this is going to benefit you. Because I think about it like this: when I went back to yoga in October to reconnect, I was trying to recover from an injury. I ended up with a cervical disc injury that we don't know how it happened. It just happened. And the thing of it is even going back to being an OT and learning how to focus on function and accommodation of things. Sometimes medical people can be their own worst nightmares in treating themselves or seeking care. It's like I was like, it'll get better. I'll just have to keep stretching. It'll get better. And it wasn't getting better. But then through yoga, through that yoke, through that connection, we started moving my body in different ways and getting strength back, getting conditioning back, getting adapted movement back. That's one of the things with OT is we adapt a lot of different things. So, for instance, in our classroom, when I see a student who's frustrated, let's say that we're doing a writing exercise or something, a student is frustrated, their writing doesn't look good. I'll have them stop, set their pencil down, close their eyes if they want. You have to be careful with that, especially with children with trauma, that closing their eyes can actually re-trigger an episode. I'll give them an opportunity to step back. I have a comfortable spot where they can, we have like a beanbag chair. We have a mat. We have a couple of mats. I'm looking at bringing more yoga mats into our classroom, and our actual start of the day will be doing a sun salutation or working through that sun salutation and really implementing everything with that. I'm trying to work on adapting what we call quantum learning, which focuses on teaching through Gardner's multiple intelligences into our classroom yoga practice, and establishing that peace corner where it's honored. Like I said earlier, sometimes when a student is going off, it's kind of like the Tasmanian devil just kind of hit from the cartoon that kind of hit your room. It's this dust storm and everything. So if I can get them to learn how to honor the peace center, and that, okay, we don't touch that. And, it's like, if you need to tear something, if you need to go after that, we don't touch that. That's where we're going to go to calm back down and things like that.
Right.
But without saying calm down.
Right. So one of the things I've mentioned in previous episodes is when we do start introducing something like flower power or Shanti hug, that we want to teach it during times when like everything's going great, and then to say, or role model, now imagine you're angry, or imagine the last time you were angry, and now try, like, add in the Shanti hug or the flower power breath.
Right.
So layering in the learning before, the fire starts. And you mentioned your peace place. What would be some things that you would have in a peace place, or if there's a parent listening or a teacher, like what might that you create in your home or classroom that a child, as they notice that they're ramping up, that then they can go to this peace place? So what does your peace place look like?
Well, my peace place is in the corner. It has a wooden shelf, a small wooden table, no glass, no hard plastic, anything like that. I really want to focus this next year on buy-in from the students. So when we talk about flower power, to have some actual flowers there, some artificial flowers that we've scented with some different scents, being careful, of course, about any students that have allergies. When you have a student who has a severe emotional challenge, the buy-in of trying to get them to imagine that they're picking a flower is less likely to occur, this is in my professional opinion, than if they actually had something tangible that they can hold in their hands.
Yes.
That's
true. The younger the child, the younger the child, the more concrete learners. So the ability, it's like a 1-year-old or an 18-month-old or 2-month-old to imagine a flower is almost impossible cognitively. So to have a flower that they can actually use. Great point, Rick. Thank you.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is that also continues if there's some emotional challenge.
Yeah. and so of course we have to be careful. I think one of the best flowers that you can use, if you're using real flowers, and you can get them at HEB or Whole Foods or at the local store, local flower shop, is carnations. They last and they have beautiful scents, and the kids can go and work with that. Or we can use artificial carnations and maybe some essential oil. Just being careful, of course, again, about students and if they have any certain allergies. Obviously, if you have a student who has a nut allergy, which I do, you wouldn't want to use almond oil in anything on that. And I know I'm not trying to be like a holistic medicine practice or anything. I'm not, saying that, but our bodies, one of the things in OT we learn is that our bodies are unique organisms that can learn how to adapt to almost any sort of challenge that's thrown at it. Will the adaptation result in full function? Possibly. Will it result in returning function that then needs to be accommodated? That's also possible. It depends on the severity of the damage as to what happens. For example, in a patient who has a stroke, it just depends on the severity, how long the stroke occurred, and their recovery and things like that. So I try and take all that from my OT background, especially when we went through our psychosocial training. OT has a big presence in psychosocial settings, in the mental health settings. We're not just the crafts people that everybody thought, okay, I'm going to arts and crafts with the OT. It's like, well, yes, you are going to occupational therapy, and we may be using arts and crafts that day. But what we really focus on in OT with mental health is developing success with functional performance. So, that child who doesn't feel like they've ever been able to create something, getting them a child who has problems with fine motor coordination. I have students who are 9 and 10 years old that don't know how to tie their shoes, or they don't have the functional capacity right now. They have the capacity, they have the capacity, but their bodies aren't working right to get that tying motion. So, I've taught rabbit ears tying, the 2 rabbit ears. I even saw, I saw it at a market when I was in South Carolina this past week, and it was a little kids thing, but it was a wooden block that was cut out like a shoe, and it had holes in it and laces so the kid could learn how to tie their shoes. And I thought,
thinking about, Rick, so with the occupational therapy and function adaptability, and the peace place in your classroom. So maybe you have a flower that they can smell. Would you also have some, whether that be, I know sometimes people use beading or other activities where they're using their hands, or maybe doing mindful coloring? Like, how would some of these adaptability pieces maybe show up in your peace place?
Yeah. That would also, as I was kind of got off on a tangent there, but one of the things that, as teachers, we look at manipulatives. I would definitely have some functional manipulatives in the peace place, some clay or some Play-Doh, some beads that they can work with, even some beads that they can just roll through their fingers. That fine motion, that sensory motion can help calm a child. You just, like I said, you have to establish the boundaries. If we're going to use the clay as the medium or the Play-Doh as the medium, we don't throw it, and things like that. If you're coming to the peace corner, you're not going to re-erupt and try and go back into the situation. It is to bring yourself back down, to self-regulate back down. The other thing that we did with the kids. My school district actually has a person who is a certified mindfulness expert, did the program through UMass. And he came in one day with one of the librarians, and we did the beads in a bottle activity. But what we actually used plastic water bottles that were half full, and then they used liquid soap in them, clear liquid soap, the beads, the trinkets, a little bit of glitter glue and things like that. And then they sealed the cap on it. So they hot glued the caps so that they were able then to use that as a calming source. And they took those home. And
Beautiful.
one of the parents actually, I don't say they're not my parents, but one of the parents actually contacted me asking me what was this bottle about? Because their student was like, I don't know, it's something we did in the library that day. And so I said, oh, this is something that you can use with him to have him focus on, creating different designs, almost kaleidoscopic, with the different colors that were in it and things like that. I know in our mindfulness training, we created the eye pillows, and we created the small glass jars. In my classroom, we have to use things like plastic because of safety concerns and things like that. So there'll be manipulatives there that
Right.
they can.
And in the show notes, we can include maybe some suggestions on some specific manipulatives you'd recommend people look into, and also I can include a recipe for making the glitter jars. And they're so great, as you suggested, Rick, in helping students learn what it is to visually focus. Because of course, when you shake up glitter in a jar, who doesn't want to look at that? Like
Right.
glitter jar. And also you can teach them that that it can also be kind of like a model of how the brain works, that when we're ruminating or when our brain's in a trance or we're upset, that's like when you shake it, that's like all the glitter flying around. And then as the glitter settles, that's like how our brain can feel, our body can feel when we are mindful and present and in the moment.
Yeah.
So we will include all of those things in the show notes, as well as how to get a hold of Rick. And Rick, thank you so much for joining us today. And I would love to have you come back and dive into more tips. So will you do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
That's one of the things is that as I gain experience with this, we share, we learn from each other. And, one of the things that I would suggest for parents who have children with that they think might have an emotional challenge is be your child's advocate, speak up, ask for assistance from the school, get documentation from your child's physician, and don't think that it's something that is just growing pains and will go away. It's not something that goes away if a child does have an emotional challenge, an emotional disturbance, a diagnosed emotional disturbance. It doesn't go away. There are treatments available. There are, obviously there's that social stigma that goes along with special education. But if that is indeed the best environment for your child to learn with the assistance that we provide, more and more of special education these days is actually inclusion based in the classroom, so that they're not separated from their peers. I have a unique situation with kids that they have to be separated, but our goal is to re-include them in a bigger environment over the course. So I would be more than happy to come back and share our experiences with our ongoing development of Eugenius in our classroom and our successes, and what works, what might work, what might not work, and to take
absolutely always looking to tweak. Well, great.
Yes.
Well, Rick, thank you for being here, and for those of you listening, be sure to check out the show notes for more ideas on tips. And to everyone, thank you for listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and as always, be amazing. See you next time.